Hello. So, I am about to release a book called Cherish Your Soul. It's the second book in the Talking Stick Diaries series, which is a 7-book series that basically gives you writing prompts to think on and journal, and in the process of doing so, perform your own healing. It's based on metaphysics and holism and all this other fun stuff. And science. Science is great. Um, One of the things that I cover in this particular book is shame issues and struggling with shame. Um, and one of the things, sometimes I put in little stories about my healing journey and how I realized these things because it helps you understand what I'm talking about more. One of the things I talk about in this book under prompt 34 is my first experience at a burlesque show. In fact, it was the Fierce Festival in Pittsburgh. It's a queer pride burlesque show. And a number of the performers have asked if they could just read this one prompt, but it's going to be easier for me to read it to you in a video than it is to have the document floating around. So this is prompt 34, my experience at my first burlesque show. Prompt 34. Shame is a tricky thing to work with. Let me tell you how my first experience at a burlesque show became an opportunity of healing for me. As a holistic practitioner, I work with people of all sorts. I work with men, women, and literally everyone in between. In my community, I'm well known for not judging people's behavior and not holding the consequences of their behaviors against them, because it's not my place to judge a person, only help them in every way I know how. Consequences and behaviors do not define people in my office, which is a known place of holistic healing no matter who you are or what you've done. I've often seen clients burst into tears, particularly homosexual HIV-positive clients, when I look them in the eyes and ask them why on earth I wouldn't work with them, or why on earth I would look down on them, or why on earth I would think they're dirty. Simply looking these people in the eye and allowing them to be dignified and beautiful human beings like they are creates a space where healing can start before we even start to look at their health struggles. You would think, with a reputation and method like that, and the work I've done with all the people in between the genders, that the Fierce Festival in Pittsburgh would not be a big deal for me. When my husband, who's a belly dancer, told me he was going to dance at the Queer Pride Burlesque show, I encouraged him and told him that was excellent to have a great time. After all, I had plans that weekend and wouldn't be able to be there. Then my plans fell through, and 3 days before the festival, I was suddenly free to go to the show. I was happy to be able to support one of his shows, but I felt a shadow rise up in me. My raising had been very strict. Our knees were not to show from our skirts even when we sat down. We were not to show our bra straps or our shoulders, and it was best if necklines wore to the collarbones. When we bent forward, no one could see our breasts as women. For me, because I had thick upper arms, most of my clothing covered to my elbows, even to the current day, particularly for modesty, and partially because fat armpits aren't exactly attractive or feminine. After all, I'm seen as a community leader, a spiritual leader, and a counselor, and a practitioner in the health field that many respect as much as doctors. There are even those who respect my practice more than the medical field, and some of those are doctors and scientists themselves. And now, a burlesque festival? How immodest, how disgraceful. What if the community saw me this way? Would they still respect me? Would they still feel comfortable bringing their struggles to me? How could I be a beacon of purity and light if I was tarnished? And then when my husband told me to wear something that showed off my, quote, glorious cleavage, how could I? Didn't this disgrace me? Didn't this disrespect my body and myself? Wouldn't that offend so many people that my practice and my fellow men would surely suffer for it? There was a back and forth struggle for those 3 days, and a good deal of what I didn't recognize were shame issues coming up for me. Reading those thoughts on paper, it's all obviously shame issues. But what was only in my head, things were not so clear. I was torn in my mind between what I believed and my attachment to my image, and what was in front of me, which I couldn't think of a truly good reason for being wrong. After all, a good woman supports her husband, correct? When I went to the festival, I had never been to a bar or club. I had never seen a burlesque show, let alone a queer pride burlesque show, and I had certainly never worn a skirt that short before. I walked in terribly self-conscious and timid. My husband was there earlier than I was, and he had found me a perch on a couch arm against the wall, away from the stage, knowing how I am. From my perch, I could see all the people. I saw outfits I couldn't believe and was at the same time quite impressed with. These people were literally walking art pieces, expressions of emotions and concepts played out on their physical forms. For a moment, I was embarrassed that I didn't know what gender many of them were, and then I realized it didn't matter. In fact, it was kind of beautiful. What did it matter if I didn't know what was between a person's legs or what he or she did with it? I wasn't planning to sleep with any of them, which is the only time it would really impact me. This way, I was forced to look at the expression rather than the form, focus on the emotion or the concept rather than the vessel of the body, and many of the expressions were graceful, joyful, beautiful, and so immensely human. This was not what I expected. Then the show began. I found I was not ashamed of their nakedness. Why should I be ashamed of something these people were not ashamed of? Their bodies were beautiful. They were beautiful. Still, all sorts of words came up. Sinful was never one of them. I do not consider nudity, sexuality, sensuality, or anything else such as this to be sinful. Words like empty, animalistic, shallow, and shameless did come up. In fact, my mother's voice, full of venom, calling people shameless, came up often, over and over. Then I thought, what's wrong with being shameless? When did shame become a virtue? Shame does nothing for people but disempower them and cripple them. In my practice, when shame issues are cleared, we sometimes even see spontaneous physical healing occur that was just a psychosomatic illness because of shame held in the body. Where did this idea of shame being honored and desirable come from? It certainly wasn't serving anyone. These people were shameless, something that we should all strive to be. I decided then and there to stop making shame a virtue. And I looked around me. I knew all 3 people there, and only 2 of them very well. Were they hollow? Were they shallow? No. Actually, the people I knew that were there were all in deep, committed relationships that were strong and healthy. They were trustworthy people with courage and honor. They were people I respected. I looked up on the stage. There was a more woman than man person doing floor work, and she had beautiful legs. Was she hollow with shallow relationships? I had no way of knowing by looking at her. I knew one thing, she was dancing with passion and quite a story. She had a history. Her eyes were deep. She was not shallow. She was not hollow. I had been told that people who presented themselves with a shameless appearance or who behaved shamelessly had empty, shallow relationships and didn't have anything of value in their lives, thus their behavior. My guard fell. I realized these were people, not input equations. I also realized there were hidden judgments that simply not thinking negatively about someone did not mean I didn't judge them. It meant I didn't think negatively of them. By assigning beliefs and words in my mind to these people, I was judging them without knowing them. I wanted to know them. What made a woman dress in army clothes and strip while she saluted without showing any emotion on her face the entire performance? What made a person cry through dance and become a swan on the stage? What made a person choose to dance a person's, quote, dreams and maybe nightmares? What made a person become the dead and die on stage, only to come through it and transform and become the living on stage? I recognized in these dances the same transformations we seek in the woods through alchemical work once a year, when I meet with other practitioners and lay people to work on our own inner transformations and deepening, which is what makes us such insightful practitioners. I had made assumptions. I had made judgments. Furthermore, I had been limited by those judgments and those assumptions. I had reflected them onto myself. Here, dancing was a way to express the inner self. In all reality, when a person free dances, that's exactly what they're doing. They're expressing their inner experience and the interaction between their soul and the music. It takes courage to do this, because they have to release their own inner assumptions and judgments on themselves, and trust theirs have released theirs. One of the dancers, the irresistible O, said something beautiful to me. She said, "You know what I don't get? Who are these people that they think I should care what they think of me? Like, you tell me what you think of me, and you're someone that thinks I'm supposed to care and let that limit my life?" What a spin on a situation. It's not uncommon to hear people in our society say, "I don't care what people think of me. It doesn't matter what they think." And then to think that person's naive, even egotistical, and thinking too much of themselves. In this beautiful woman's worldview, the question checked the ego of the outer world. Who were they to think they could impose on her and her life? What an ego. What self-righteousness. What shallowness to not even look at these human beings being human. What emptiness to not allow the self to be deepened by the intense emotion of the dance. In a queer pride burlesque festival, I was forced to ask myself, who was the empty one here? Who was shallow? Who was prideful? And when was shame risen to a virtue? Here in this little bar in the Strip, I had to take a look at this idea of images and keeping to them. What was it about being a professional that made my being a human being become mutually exclusive? Why were role models expected to be only role models? Were they not also people? In a dark disco ball lit room amongst people with both or neither gender, I found a place for healing, deepening, and becoming more human. By the end of the night, I was laughing freely. I had no image to uphold and could just be free to enjoy being. And the entertainment was amazing. As I let go of my assumptions, judgments, and other issues, I became free. It didn't have to be figured out, and was going through all my inner shame was not going to happen because I still wouldn't let it go to feel it if I examined it too closely. Instead, I decided to just let it go. I knew what shame felt like. I decided to simply choose to laugh, to choose to be happy and joyful, and simply choose to be shameless. That didn't mean I had to act a certain way, simply that I didn't have to act at all. In that, there was freedom, release, relaxation, and healing. Now it's your turn. A good portion of healing issues within our deeper psyche is being able to decipher the words that allow those thoughts to exist. Once the words are found, the belief system becomes clear and the healing work can occur. So, I challenge you to go to a burlesque show this weekend. Just then, you had a series of thoughts, words, and feelings. Those are what you need to work with. Those are the words associated with shame, body issues, gender issues, and sexuality that you need to work with. If nothing came up, maybe even a regular at that scene, I challenge you to take up exotic or burlesque dancing. There. Those are the thoughts you need to work with. What are you thinking? What have you been taught? What perceptions, hidden judgments, and hidden assumptions do you have that limits you and others? Is being shameless an insult or a compliment to you? What are the differences between not thinking badly about someone and judging them? What are the differences between not judging and not thinking badly about yourself? What about the people who think you should care about what they project onto you and the limits they try to put on your life and your experience of being human? Are they egotistical and disrespectful for wanting to limit you because of their thoughts? Is it egotistical of you to not be concerned with them, or is it simply giving yourself as much respect as you give others? What would it feel like to not allow people to put limitations on you? Okay, so 12 minutes it took to read a whole prompt. You get the idea of what the book is about. There are, in this one, 73 different prompts. It's a good read. Let me know if you liked it. There are some links below if you want to get in touch with me. Hope you enjoyed it, and thank you guys who had that amazing festival. You really opened my eyes. Thank you for that.